Hello, good evening. Thank you for joining me again. Did you know that today is World Wildlife Day? I didn't until an email landed in my inbox this morning informing me of the fact. And because of that email, I have been thinking about wildlife today. So the wildlife that I see most of around here are the birds in my garden. In fact, the first thing that I saw as I looked out of my window this morning, well before I knew it was World Wildlife Day, was a pheasant shuffling and scratching about in the long grass at the bottom of the fence between my garden and the field. Later on, I took my binoculars out into the garden for a while for a closer look at some of my wildlife. I did have a particular reason. I promised myself that this year I was going to try to learn to recognize the calls of some of the birds that frequent my garden so that I can recognize them by hearing them as well as by being able to see them. And I needed my binoculars specifically to check that the sound that I was fairly certain was a chaffinch was indeed a chaffinch. And I am very happy to say that it was a chaffinch. But later this afternoon, I was sitting at my desk, keeping most of my attention on what I was meant to be doing, and half an eye on the birds on the feeder outside my study window. There were lots of sparrows around, and this is good because I gather that numbers of sparrows have dropped significantly in this country, especially in cities, but there are still a lot of them in my garden at the moment. There were also great tits, blue tits, coal tits, and the woodpecker coming and going, the usual things for my bird feeder. And then all of a sudden, something different happened. I wasn't really watching at the time, so I didn't see clearly to begin with, but I saw enough to register that something bigger than the great tits and the sparrows had just kind of plunged into the bush next to the bird feeder. Most of the small birds disappeared, but from the racket coming from the bush, there were obviously still some sparrows hiding in the depths. Well, I kept watching and was rewarded by a female sparrow hawk reappearing and coming to sit on a branch of the bush just outside my window. At a distance of about 5 feet, they are impressive. Fierce hooked beak, bright yellow eyes, and that beautiful brown and white barred plumage. It was a female. Not so long ago, the sparrow hawk was almost extinct in parts of this country, partly because of people killing it, persecution, because they didn't want it around, but also partly because of the use of pesticides, which, as well as occasionally killing the birds themselves, it would build up in their bodies because of other things they were eating. And the result was that their eggs, the eggshells, would be very thin, so they broke very easily and the young didn't survive. I did not see my sparrow hawk today, manage to catch a sparrow, but I wondered afterwards how I would have felt if I had. Would I still have been pleased with the stunning view that I got of it? Or would I have been more sad for the sparrow that had been killed? Nature is sometimes difficult like that. And we can find it hard, I think, to accept that nature works that way. But despite studies looking into this, there is no evidence that the sparrowhawk population coming back has actually affected the songbird population in a bad way. So maybe nature, in fact, has its balance right. And I guess the question then, for me anyway, is do we have our balance with nature right? And I think it's quite obvious if we look at different places around the world to see that we don't have that balance right. And sometimes for those of us who see the wrongness in some of the things that are going on around the world, we can feel maybe a bit like a sparrow looking at a sparrowhawk, that the problem is too big for us to do anything about, except hide until it goes away. But I don't think that's true. I think we need to redress the balance between humanity and the rest of creation. And I firmly believe that every one of us has a part to play in that. We just have to be up for finding out what our part is. As ever, I'm going to finish with a prayer. And as ever, if you'd like to make it yours, feel free to stick an amen in the box, or tell me about the interesting wildlife that you've seen this World Wildlife Day. Creator God, thank you for the way that nature fits together, at least until humankind interferes. Help us to find the place that we truly fit into your creation in a way that brings good to all of it. Amen. Thank you for listening. See you again tomorrow, I hope. Bye for now.